On today's show, Alex Antetokounmpo signed and waived, but it does make for a pretty interesting Wisconsin Herd roster. We're going to discuss that. Bobby Portis on the hunt for gold into the Final Four now, Team USA in the FIBA World Cup. Also, how confident is Justin Garcia in the Bucks maybe being a one seed and winning the NBA title? We're going to ask him that. And Christian Wood going to the Lakers. It feels like Bucks fans are always going to want to talk about Christian Wood, so we're going to do that tonight. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Bucks. My name's Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show almost back Monday to Friday, September. We're easing our way back into the regular season for 2024, but most days on this show, and also find my work over at ESPN. And alongside me from the Bucks Radio Network is Justin Garcia. Speaking of people that are just starting to gear up for the NBA regular season. No more days off for you over the next few weeks as you begin your prep and your research for this season. Justin, today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. We'll speak about that in just a little bit. And also, we thank everyone for making Locked On Bucks your first watch or first listen every time the show drops. And you can keep up to date with that by subscribing and turning the notifications on, whether it's on YouTube or on the audio platform. Dropping a comment, a like, rating, review. It's free to do all those things, and it really does help the show. And look, when you get to the middle of September or the start of September and you've got plenty of Bucks news, it always gets us pretty excited. And I don't know, maybe it does make you think, Justin, that the season is just around the corner and you better start dusting off your preparation notebook and getting ready for what's to come.
I started that last week when it kind of snuck up on you of Labor Day was here. And then it was, well, before you know it, we're 3 weeks away from Media Day. So I should probably start to brush up on everything else that happened other than the Bucks and the teams that we've paid a lot of attention to. So I think I'm 3 teams in so far for the note taking and prep for the upcoming season, and you got 20 days to basically to get it all in.
So, and I've already gotten sidetracked at the start of this podcast. We're going to get into the FIBA World Cup, there's some Wisconsin Herd news, and the Bucks title hopes overall, and then Christian Wood. So we're going to get to all of that. But the preparation stuff is interesting, and I know there are a lot of fans that probably take notes as well and have their own way of keeping stats and all those types of things. I'm an old school pen and paper notebook man. So when you're taking this, you're talking about going through the roster moves, last year's stats. Yeah. What does it look like for you?
So I used to be, for the most part, I do prefer your method of pen and paper because especially for notes, I'll take.
I think it's retention for me.
Exactly. For games, I retain that information a lot more if I write it down and I look at myself and read read what I've written down. So like for games, I'll take notes when coaches talk on my computer or on my iPad, just because it's easier to take the tablet into that room. But anything I do beforehand, I'll write down. But for this, I did deviate, and everything is just through my notes on my MacBook. But I kind of, I don't know if I'd say cheat, but I use a lot of different things. And really the main launching point is Nate Duncan in the Dunked On podcast when they do their season previews. I'll listen to all of those for those corresponding teams, and anything that kind of sticks out, I'll make a note of, and then go back to kind of look up some numbers that back that up or speak to that. And anything interesting about individual players and what they're going to be doing differently or coaching changes, I'll look at that and how it ties into what they did against the Bucks last year or what that player did against the Bucks. But I get a lot of information from that and from hearing those that cover those teams that Nate has on his show kind of give you the behind the scenes and talk about that. And then anybody that, we've come across that we're familiar with, that we read their stuff, I'll usually look up some of that. I mean, obviously there's a lot more familiarity with teams that we see a lot more, Central Division teams and teams that I do know people within or around that organization, like the Bulls and the Cavaliers and a few of those teams, the Pistons as well. There's a little more familiarity, and especially teams like the Celtics and Sixers, I feel like we're constantly, in Heat, looking into what they're doing and have that familiarity. But You don't want to get into the case. So I prepare every single game as if I'm the one that's going to have to call that game too, because you never know what's going to happen. So I don't want to get caught with who is number 17 or what did this guy do last year? Where did he come from? Where did he go to school? So it's pretty, I don't know if I'd say intense, but it's like I usually, just like I did in school, to put all of it off until like 2 weeks before everything gets going.
It's interesting. And for any listeners, if you do have, whether it's a spreadsheet or notes or anything that you take, whether just for your own stat keeping or whatever it may be, I'm always fascinated by fans. So let us know if you have a method that you do. As I said, I'm a note taker, and we're doing the FIBA World Cup broadcast right now over here in the US, and I was speaking to someone earlier today. I'll take a bunch of notes for whatever game I'm covering. Honestly, probably use 3% of the notes that I take, but you just have everything just in case any type of wild scenario comes through, which is fun. That's also part of the job.
3% is like right around that number. I remember when I first started doing radio for the Bucks and just kind of picking the brain of Jim Paschke and Dennis Krause, the two guys that really helped me out the most. They both said I use 5% of all the notes that I bring and everything that I prep and I bring with me to the game. I should point out too, the thing that takes up the most time, I guess you could argue it's a waste of time, but for the last 5 years, I've kept my own spreadsheet of statistics for not just the first year I did it was just the Bucks, but I do every single game that's played throughout the league. So that takes up a decent amount of time to format the spreadsheet to put in every single game by date. And I don't know how I'm going to do that now with the in-season tournament because it's all chronological. But I would keep spreadsheets of every statistic you could imagine from every single game played throughout the league. And I know a lot of that is still accessible that I could get through the NBA site or through Second Spectrum and Cleaning the Glass and other sites like that. But I did it just because it's nice to be able to filter and have, especially during a game of, man, the Bucks have 62 rebounds tonight. Is that a season high? And I can immediately look to, no, they had 68 rebounds 2 weeks ago, or they had this many the second week of the season. So
an unintentional look behind the curtain. I didn't mean that, but I think it's fascinating. So if anyone is interested in those types of stories, and whether it's Justin, myself, or Eric, or whoever it is that covers the team, or other people that you're interested in hearing, let us know, because I do personally always find those stories interesting, but it might not be what you're into for this show. One other thing I should just say quickly, I've got some mic issues tonight, so I'm on computer audio, so it might not be as crisp as we normally like to have it, but we appreciate the patience with that. So as we get to the Wisconsin Herd, and this is just a quick little note. This happened a few days ago. Alex Antetokounmpo was signed and then waived, and I'm going to steal the tweet from Eric Name so I get this info right. He was the one who broke really the details of this, and this isn't new, but he said they did this with Alex last offseason. It allows the Bucks to retain his G League rights and makes Alex eligible for a bonus up to $75K if he spends at least 60 days with the Herd. So I think more generally, this Wisconsin Herd team looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. But, this is a scenario where you get all sorts of weird opinions that they shouldn't do this, or this is like some sort of weird roster maneuvering that the Bucks have done. I couldn't care less, Justin. Alex, if they want him to be a part of the Milwaukee Bucks organization, Wisconsin Herd organization, I think that's great. We've always loved the fact that the whole family has been supported by the franchise, and I'm sure Giannis would love to have him around. I can't speak for him, but that would seem to make sense. I just can't see how this is possibly something anyone could have a problem with.
Yeah, and we joke a lot too, especially with like player options of, I'm going to go ahead and pencil in that he's going to pick up that option. I'm going to go ahead and
he's spending the 60 days?
I'm going to go ahead and pencil in that Alex is getting that bonus, and it's going to be the full $75K, or he's getting more because somebody is going to put him on their roster, just like we heard leading up to the signing, and then afterwards again, Thanasis almost signed with the Knicks. I mean, you're going to see that type of gamesmanship as well of maybe we'll bring on Alex, and hey, Giannis, it's pretty great over here. Just ask your brother. So, I do think he'll spend the 60 days plus with the Herd. But to your larger point, that it's going to be, I guess you could say, a pretty fun team to keep tabs on with the Herd this year, and you think about the history of that that franchise. When they first started, it was, man, the Bucks finally have a G League affiliate, D League, I think the first year that the Herd were there, but you finally have that affiliate. Then there was a bit of a rough patch that the second year, but it seemed like year after year, the last couple of years, you would really only have one guy maybe that you would hang your hat on of like, we'll see if this guy can develop. Other than that, it was just guys that were 14th or 15th, 13th some years, depending on the roster makeup, guy on the roster that were just shuffling back and forth. And that was the quote unquote young talent that you got to see there. But as you know, we've touched on throughout the summer, it's a much different story this year on the Bucks NBA roster, granted towards the back of it, but that Herd team, especially, that all those names of the young guys that we talked about coming through the draft, Ty Washington that you just added as well, and then some of the other holdovers from last year, a guy like Iverson Molinar, who I know is back as well. There's a handful of young guys that I don't think anybody would say these guys are going to be starters in the league or all-star caliber players. We're not going that far, but intriguing guys and, you know, young talent that they're guys that you could at least see becoming rotational players, which in the past, no knock on those players that had come through Oshkosh, but that just frankly wasn't going to be the case.
I'm with you, and I've always been someone, particularly since these changes came through and you've got the G League, that I would hope at this point that there's no kind of stigma or negative connotation where you go play for the G League, it's bad for you. I couldn't care less, particularly because the Bucks are a contending team. If there's a young player, whether it's Andre Jackson or Chris Livingston, Ty Washington, and yes, we hope all of those guys come to the Bucks main roster and they play. But if they're not, go play 4 games in the G League. And get the reps and play 5-on-5 in obviously a pretty high quality league. So I think it's going to be exciting. Hopefully we can do some podcasts with people that certainly cover the Wisconsin Herd a little bit closer than we're able to as we follow the Bucks. But I think it's going to be an exciting team. By the way, maybe someone will mention a little bit later on this podcast if we have time that did put up big numbers for the Wisconsin Herd. Christian Wood. We'll get to that next. But also we need to talk about Team USA and Bobby Portis. They're only 2 wins away from a gold medal, so we're going to get to that next after we talk about FanDuel, today's sponsor of the podcast. The NFL season is right here, and FanDuel has some incredible offers. That's America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV as well. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use and you can bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. And we're going to talk about the Bucks and their chances this year. And if you are looking at NBA odds and NBA futures, NBA Finals betting odds, Boston Celtics, the favorite to make the finals, plus 470. Denver Nuggets not too far behind in a stacked Western Conference, plus 480. And the Bucks are right there at plus 600. So the Celtics and the Bucks, as we expected, the favorites in the Eastern Conference, certainly with FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with an offer you won't want to miss. That's FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Lots more coming up on Locked On Bucks this week and leading into next week. As we said, under a month until preseason basketball gets underway. Going to have training camp just before that. And we're just starting to see some different warm-up games and scrimmage games. I know tonight, the Perth Wildcats, I'm sure our listeners are very invested in the Perth Wildcats, but they're in the US in Las Vegas playing the G League Ignite tonight. So you're just going to start to see some funny games going on and players obviously arriving. So the news cycle is absolutely going to heat up. So stick with Locked On Bucks. As we said, subscribe and turn your notifications on for every show that we drop. Bobby Portis, Team USA, 2 wins away. So they're going to play Germany on in the US. It's going to be Friday morning. That's an 8:40 Eastern time, 7:40 Central time tip-off in the AM, that is. So you're going to get up early to watch this game and, I don't know, take the day off work if that's what you want to do. I don't know what you're allowed to do for the FIBA World Cup. Let me ask you a question specific to Bobby Portis, though. He's been productive when he's got minutes. Hasn't been major minutes, but the US overall under Steve Kerr really spreading the load. When you look at Bobby Portis, do you look at this experience for him at this point as a veteran and really the veteran player of this whole Team USA squad? Do you look at potentially winning a gold, this experience as a positive, and he can take anything from this and bring it to the Milwaukee Bucks this year in a positive way?
I think it's a positive, and the experience he has quite a bit to take from and bring with him. But I don't think that hinges on the result.
Okay.
For younger guys, I would say, yeah, like if you can go through this tournament and win the gold, and experience winning at international play, a high level, that is something that you could use as something to propel you and to keep building on. For Bobby, I mean, he's already won a title that I think it's more, and I've said this before, I think it's just more the experience of getting out of your comfort zone and some new learnings that I go back to whenever, NBA, NFL, wherever it is, any sport, when there's an opening for a head coach position or a general manager, and you'll see the team. I know with my beloved White Sox, it just happened too, where you don't even interview anybody other than the guy that you already know you're going to hire. And I just don't know why teams and organizations do that, even outside of sports, because you're basically getting the answers to the test. Like it's a way to get free information and see league wide, what do others think of you? And what have others seen with, well, I noticed you guys were doing this, and if I came in here, I would do this. I think this suits you pretty well, and I think some of these things don't work. That it's just a way to get that information and to make you better. And I think for Bobby Portis and players like that, to be here in this experience of playing for Team USA in this tournament around different players that you haven't typically played with, but also to play for a coach like Steve Kerr and the assistants that he has on his staff too, to get communication and feedback from that group, but especially the way that the Warriors play offensively. And we've seen, parts of it as well at Team USA, that there haven't really been any ball stoppers. I think Anthony Edwards is the closest that you would see, that it's more heliocentric and moving the ball around. And those are the things that I think are the bigger takeaways, not so much success or falling short or what do you take away from winning a gold medal. It's just the experience of playing in a new system and playing with the new teammates and just picking other people's brains in a basketball sense and bringing that with you to how you prepare for the season and some of the things that you'd bring to your team.
I think it's a good point. And this has been a fascinating Team USA group for some of the reasons that you pointed to. And they got a bunch of guys. In fact, they've got 7 guys out of the 12 that are averaged 18 plus points per game for their NBA team last year. So they might not have the top 10 guys in the NBA, but they've got guys that are used to either being the 1 option or the 2 option. But I think they seem to be getting along. And even Anthony Edwards in the last game against Italy, he was the guy that was dominating the shots and dominating the scoring. He only scored 3 points. He was scoreless at halftime, but he still seemed happy. He had a smile on his face. So it seems like it's a pretty positive environment for Bobby to be around. It seems like the type of atmosphere that he would thrive in. But yeah, I'm curious whether he takes anything away. The last point I would make about the World Cup and Olympics, because it does seem that in general, the Team USA and maybe the superstar players might prioritize the Olympics. To me, at least, there's no question the World Cup is significantly harder to win. And maybe sometimes some of those superstar players aren't there, but there's only 12 teams in the Olympics. There's 32 in the World Cup. And there is a lot of things that can go wrong along the way. So to me, at least, it's just a significantly harder competition to win. So with an entire new roster, none of the guys that were there for Tokyo, I think it's a meaningful win if they were able to take gold. And I think for Bobby, that would be a significant achievement on his resume. And you never know. The Bucks have a new coach this year. He's under Steve Kerr now. Maybe he does take some things. I'm never someone that would shy away from those type of experiences.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a good point too with the amount of teams that you have in FIBA versus the Olympics, and also the talent pool is much different, as you pointed to. I mean, it's no knock on the names. I wouldn't expect Bobby Portis to be on the Olympic roster. Probably Walker Kessler, some of those names. I wouldn't expect them to be there. And, because of that, your talent is a lot more spread out in this tournament than it is in the Olympics. And, the other interesting thing is, I think Team USA, I haven't looked at this, but I would assume they're the betting favorites to win the gold in this. But But I mean, when you look up and down the roster, I think initially everybody looked at it and said, this is Team USA, and getting used to some of those names of seeing like is Jalen Brunson, one of the three best players on this roster. And we've seen some young guys take a big step. We mentioned Anthony Edwards. Tyrese Halliburton's been the other big breakout story for Team USA in this tournament. But, the interesting thing, I know it's going to change somewhat when you get to the Olympics, but just looking at this roster, your first reaction is, well, where are all the stars? But then you suddenly realize, well, yeah, some of those big names are missing, but it's not like it's going to be just this huge influx of talent, because it's no longer to the point, and I know this isn't unique for me to say, but it's no longer to the point that Team USA has the top 20 players in the league or All-American or 18 of the 20. I mean, when you look at the players on this current roster and then just look at, I know it's not the best barometer, but if you go by scoring, the top 20 scoring players American in the NBA, there's 2 of them on this roster. So you're like, well, there's a lot that'll be there on the Olympics. But when you look at it, I mean, Steph Curry and Kevin Durant and LeBron, you look at the age of a lot of those guys, they're not going to be playing Olympic basketball anymore. So it's a little bit of a youth movement that we're seeing, where all of those American stars are starting to get in their 30s, mid 30s and older in the case of LeBron. But then also we've talked about this for 2 decades, and it feels like now is when it's really hitting you in the face in how much of a global game this has become, where if you just look at the top 20 players in the league, at best, 10 of them are American, that's how much it's spread out now.
Yeah, and that, depending on who qualifies for the Olympics, but that'll be the case again next year if you do have a Giannis and a Jokic. Luka Doncic has had a big tournament. They got bounced this morning as we record this. But, yeah, when you have those absolute megastar, big-name international players, Josh Giddey, of course, we have to reference as well. So these Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the Canada team, which is stacked, and it looks like we might have a USA-Canada final, which would be pretty damn entertaining. So, yeah, I think the international game's getting stronger, and overall, it would be fun to see Bobby if he can claim this gold.
It would be fun. And real quick, the last point is, who doesn't want to see a Team USA Canada final, just if for no other reason than seeing Dylan Brooks and Anthony Edwards going one-on-one.
Oh, man. And I'll tell you what we're going to need. We're going to need Pat Connaughton to get over to the Philippines if Bobby Portis wins gold, so they can reenact the champagne celebration TV interview post-game, because let's face it, one of the great moments for the Bucks. So the FIBA World Cup, as I said, that's Friday morning. That's 8:40 a.m. Eastern Time, 7:40 a.m. Central Time. Watch that game. We'll do something after that, because it's going to be exciting if the Team USA can move through to the gold medal game. So we'll keep tabs on the FIBA World Cup. I've got a question.
Well, I was going to say, if they do go through to the gold medal game, then you got quite a Sunday where that'll be, I believe, same time that the gold medal game takes place, and that'll roll right into your Packers, Bears, and the rest of the NFL slate.
Big day. What time are the Packers playing Sunday? Noon?
I believe that's a noon kickoff.
Oh, boy. There is going to be some rough heads on Monday morning if the sports fans of Wisconsin have a big day opening weekend of the NFL. Of course, check out Locked On Packers as well. I want to ask you a question from the Athletics fan survey. We're going to get to that next, and it's regarding the number 1 seed and what does it matter. So we're going to talk about that after this. The Athletic fan survey, Eric Name does a great job on this every single year, and I'm curious about this. One of the questions, and you should go check out the full story at The Athletic, and we might continue to bring up these topics as the weeks go on. This was a good one, though. Do you care if the Bucks are the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference at the end of the regular season? I'm going to assume that you say no, Justin, so I'm not going to ask you that. What I'm going to ask you is, what do you think the percentage split was between no and yes for this question? Do you care if the Bucks are the number 1 seed in the East?
I'm going to say 66% said no.
Oh, I tell you what, you're an optimist. You are an optimist, Justin, because don't forget, the Bucks were the number 1 seed and did not go well last year. Also remember, they were the number 3 seed when they won the title in 2021. So historically, number 1 seed hasn't actually gone that well for the Bucks. 80% of Bucks fans said they don't give a stuff if they're the number one seed, and 20% say that they're still interested. Do you care, though? I think, to me, at least the seeding at this point in the season just feels so irrelevant, because you can get to the number one seed, but you can be absolutely battling by the time you get there. Maybe you have an injury late in the season. Like, without context, just saying the number one seed means a lot, I think is kind of wrong. It just feels kind of irrelevant.
Yeah, I personally don't care. And the Bucks did win the title on a number one seed, the first title. But yeah, like we've seen, so they're 1 for 4 then, that the 3 times you got it under Bud, you lost in the conference finals, in the second round, and then the first round. So it got progressively worse each year that you had the number one seed. And, we've talked too about, well, when the Eastern Conference, we thought, was the better of the two conferences, that factored into it, of, well, it makes your path easier. But the whole advent of the play-in tournament, and I think, despite what we saw last year, I don't necessarily think that's the new norm, that you're going to see play-in teams. I know the league would love that because it makes it relevant and it gives it more substance. I don't think it's going to be an annual thing where either the 7 or 8 seed wins their play-in game and then knocks off the 1 or the 2 seed. I think we ran into some special circumstances last year. And I think part of what's going to, kind of detour that too is what they've added in the CBA for some of the individual awards in all NBA, of the number of games that you have to play, that I don't necessarily know that you're going to see guys missing heavy games unless it's legitimate injuries. And that's going to factor into where their teams are in the standings as well. So I think last year was just a culmination of a lot of things. I'm not saying it'll never happen again. I think it will. I just don't think it's going to be a yearly thing where one of those 2 play-in tournament teams in their conference wins a series. So that was one of the things that kind of offset that 1 seed. But I think it's, we've seen enough to know this isn't so much the NFL where you want to be the hottest team going into the playoffs. That can help somewhat. You just have to be a complete team, that it doesn't really matter where you're seated. I mean, obviously you don't want to be the 8th seed and having to go through a play-in tournament and then be the underdog in each of your series. But it all comes down, to me, to your roster construction, that even if you don't have home court advantage, if you build a roster that's versatile enough that can play multiple ways, that to me is more important than your seeding or what your draw is. I mean, certainly the latter has a little more impact, but I think your roster construction is, we've seen now the last couple of years, a lot more important than what that seed number is.
It's interesting because if I go back to 2019 and, you get a Pistons team that the Bucks had an average winning margin of 30 points or something ridiculous like that during the regular season. Like, that was just such a mismatch that there's really nothing that could go wrong. All you did was watch that series and cross your fingers that there wasn't an injury. The other years, even when they won the title as a 3 seed, I think generally, to your point, and it's exactly right, that you will generally carry a little more anxiety. And the Bucks probably did because of the history of the Miami Heat a year earlier. But a 3 versus 6 or a 4 versus 5, you should be playing a team that is pretty competent. You should be able to handle them, but you're going to be playing a more competent team. I think generally with an 8 seed, that's not going to be the case. So when I look at that, I think that the number 1 seed absolutely should matter. But I don't look at, across any conference really, the number 1 seed over the last few years and thought, wow, there's no point showing up. This is clearly the best team in the NBA or the conference. I just don't think that's the way it goes anymore.
No, if they wanted to make the number 1 seed even more important, and I'm a little surprised this didn't get a little more traction after we saw a 1 seed lose and we saw the Lakers advance. If you're the 1 seed, you pick the winner of those 2 teams that comes out. I think that's a part of it, that you don't want to label that, or you don't want to put that target on you. But that's one way that would make it important. And look, it's not grind over spilled milk, and I know you're grasping at straws, that I'm not saying this is the reason why the Heat beat the Bucks, but when you think about it, there's some advantages you would think you would have that just aren't there, that you have to wait until Friday to find out who you're playing, and you get a day and a half to prepare. I mean, I know your assistants are going through all of the possible outcomes, but you don't know until Friday night who your opponent is going to be. Whereas that 2 seed, they know what, Tuesday, Wednesday, whenever it's played, of all right, this is who we're playing, and we got half of a week to prepare for that.
That's a good point. We love the assistant coaches, and think of the assistant coaches because they're not sitting on their hands during that playing tournament. They're actually doing double or triple the work for all the teams to be prepared. So I'm sure that they would be happy with a few extra days rest as well, or more awareness of the team you're going to be playing. So yeah, it's a good point. It's going to be fascinating this year, but let us know what you think. Do you care about the number 1 seed? Is that something you're going to stress yourself out about this season? Because I keep on saying it, but I think this is going to be an interesting regular season and maybe a little bit more of a roller coaster than we've seen over the last few years in terms of the Bucks figuring things out under Adrian Griffin. So we're going to leave Christian Wood, but finish us off.
Yeah, we got to leave Christian Wood for the guy that has the most to say about Christian
Wood.
But
Woodlands assemble.
But I feel like this is going to be a year where I guess you could say this somewhat was the case in Bud's first year when the Bucks were that 1 seed, that going into the year, all of the talk and attention, at least internally or from Bucks fans, was we should be able to have home court advantage in the first round. That you think about year after year, the Bucks were essentially a 7 seed when they were getting into the playoffs, that when Bud arrived, it was okay, now we can finally have home court and we can be one of the top 4 seeds. You start 7-0 and you get the 1 seed. That I think that snuck up on people nationally of, wow, I didn't expect this from the Bucks. I thought maybe they'd be, a top 3 seed. I didn't think they'd be the 1 seed, and a handful of Bucks fans too. I think this is going to be a somewhat similar year where I don't think it's going to be the Bucks. I don't think it's going to be the Celtics. I don't think it's going to be the Miami Heat, especially if a Damian Lillard trade extends into the season. I think this is set up to be a year where it's another team that jumps up and it's holy cow, how did that team? Maybe it's the Cavs, but a team like that is your 1 seed, not necessarily the team that you would look at if this is the team that's coming out of the East. But I think that's what we're set up for this year.
Dante DiVincenzo and the New York Knickerbockers at Madison Square Garden is going to be absolutely electric. It's fascinating. I think it's a pretty open Eastern Conference, and I keep saying it below the Bucks and Celtics, and I might look silly at the end of the season, but that's the way I read it. That's the way it feels right now. But you're right. I think there will be 1 or 2 teams that leap up and they surprise. So it's going to be fascinating to see who those teams are. Let us know what you thought about today's show. Once again, apologies for the audio. At some point in time, we'll fix this up, but I'm still on the road. It's been a long time in this hotel room, and we've got some mic issues, so we'll see if we can figure that out. More Locked On Bucks coming up for the rest of the week. Frank's going to be back. We'll talk about Christian Wood. We need his take on Ty Washington as well, but continue to let us know in the comments or via Twitter or social media, wherever you can find us, what you want us to talk about. We'll continue to do that. For Justin and myself, we'll leave it there, and we'll speak to you guys next time.